team, obviously, and we got Santa Barbara Dodgers here. But I would be remiss before we start if we cannot pay tribute to a man named Joe Ramirez. He was drafted by your cousin, who was drafted by the Dodgers through Tommy Lasorda, who recently had his funeral. So if we can have just a moment of silence for Joe, that would be great. Here's Joe right here, wonderful picture. Okay, so let's begin. Today's book, Daybreak at Chavez Ravine, Fernandomania and the remaking of the Los Angeles Dodgers. Of course, most of you are of the age to remember Fernando Valenzuela. I did. I remember talking my way into the Dodger Stadium via Uncle Al Campanis, who was a family friend, to get free tickets to watch him pitch. And it was a wonderful sight. But he also influenced millions and millions of Mexicans and Mexican American people, and also was responsible for bringing them back into the Dodger Stadium after the travesty of what happened when Dodger Stadium cleared out the neighborhood of Chavez Ravine to make way for their ballpark. One person I would like to quote is a friend of mine. His name is Polo Asensio. And Polo says, he inspired not only me, but millions of Mexicans, period. Kids and adults, I can truly say that without his inspiration, my life and journey would have been very different. And I quote Polo because Polo, as you can see here is a photo of Polo. Polo was a janitor janitor at the Santa Barbara County Education Office when he first heard the games on television, Fernando Valenzuela. And now Polo is the Spanish announcer for the Major League St. Louis Cardinals. Wow. So he's a great guy. Even if you don't know Spanish, he's a great announcer. So today we're very pleased to bring Erik Sherman. He's a baseball historian, New York Times bestselling author of Kings of Queens, Life Beyond Baseball with 86 Mets, and Two Sides of Glory, the 1986 Boston Red Sox in their own words, which is a book that broke my heart. He is the co-author of 5 other highly acclaimed baseball-themed books. He's a 2023 inductee to the New York State Baseball Hall of Fame for his baseball writing and hosts the Erik Sherman podcast. Visit his site, erikshermanbaseball.com. But for now, please welcome Erik Sherman.
Thank you, Michael.
So I'm going to ask a couple quick questions, then Erik's going to go for talk, then I'll ask him some more, then we'll open it up to the audience. Your life in baseball, what was your first love in baseball?
Oh, my first love was Willie Mays. 1973, I started watching baseball, and I'm from New York, from the New York area, and the Mets happened to go to the World Series to play the Oakland A's. And in that great 73 series that went 7 games, and it was Willie Mays' last series, and he got his last hit in that series as well. And you know, the moment of silence that you gave, it really resonated because we lost Vida Blue today.
Yes.
One of the great left-handed pitchers of all time. But it was love at first sight. I started writing professionally when I was 14 years old. I had a weekly column in a New Jersey newspaper. My father was in the newspaper business, so I've always had a love of baseball. I played through college and men's leagues, and I've always loved writing. So my writing and baseball, it was a perfect marriage. And so this is my 8th book on baseball. I'm working on my 9th now, and it's great to be here. And thanks for coming out today.
Great. One more question, and I'll let you take over. Obviously, this is a great story, but it was never written about. And I'm wondering about how you decided to go about doing the story.
So I quickly found out, first of all, it's a great story. And in fact, for anyone that reads the New York Times, when you woke up this morning, you saw a feature story on Chavez Ravine and how the people that were removed from Chavez Ravine against their wishes, and I'll get into that in a moment. They're now seeking retribution, and there was a big piece in the Times today. So this story is really getting a lot of publicity right now, and my book is helping that along, certainly. So why has this great story of Fernando Valenzuela, how he made Mexican Americans feel better about the Dodgers after 20 really difficult years, after Mexican Americans were, some of them, forcibly removed from Chavez Ravine to make way for Dodger Stadium. Nobody wrote about Fernando because I quickly found out that Fernando wasn't going to cooperate. And writers like the subject to cooperate. They want his thoughts. You know, what were you thinking when you took the mound on opening day in '81, and you know, Jerry Royce and Bert Hooton weren't available, and you first start your big league career. You know, how did it feel to pitch on opening day at Dodger Stadium? Well, Fernando doesn't like to talk about it. So, anyway, I was a little bit discouraged but not surprised because I had heard how shy Fernando is. Many of my friends are writers, and we compare notes. And one of my friends reminded me that the great writer, Gay Talese, wrote a piece on Frank Sinatra back in 1966 for Esquire entitled "Frank Sinatra Has a Cold." And Frank Sinatra didn't like Esquire, and so he wasn't going to help Gay Talese with his long-form essay for the magazine, even if it was Gay Talese. So what Gay Talese did was, for about 4 or 5 days, he kind of shadowed Frank. You know, kind of went where the clubs he was going to go to. If Frank went to play pool in some club, he followed him there. And he just wanted to see how he interacted with people and what he was like. And Frank Sinatra had a cold, and he was in a particularly bad mood those days because it affected his voice. Gay Talese also interviewed Frank's inner circle that was around him all the time. And then those people that weren't in his inner circle, and people that were impacted by Frank's music. Well, that's what I decided to do with Fernando Valenzuela. So I spent 3 evenings up in the Dodgers press box and just kind of observed him and watch how he interacted with people. And I interviewed nearly 100 people for this book, and including those in his inner circle, like Jaime Jarrín, Pepe Mínguez, Mike Brito, the scout that signed him, and they were extremely cooperative. So I think this book is really the first piece where you really get a sense of who Fernando Valenzuela is. So that's how I got into it.
I can completely relate. Years ago, Fernando was honored by the Baseball Reliquary and I just asked to get one quote from him, and he goes to me, "Just a minute." And he goes away for like 45 minutes, talks to somebody else about what this award is, and then he came back to give me one sentence quote. And he was so shy he didn't accept the award on his own. Bobby Castillo, the gentleman, you know, who taught him the screwball, was the one who. But he was so humble and so shy. He was so soft-spoken. It was like the greatest greatest quote I've ever got in my life.
Yeah, his shyness shouldn't be misconstrued as being pompous or above. It's just the opposite. He's really a sweet guy. I've had a chance to meet him briefly, and he could not have been more cordial. He's just an intensely shy individual.
He's a gentleman.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your wonderful book.
Okay, thank you. So, the story of Fernando Valenzuela doesn't begin with Fernandomania in 1981. It doesn't begin when Fernando was born in 1960. The story of Fernando Valenzuela begins back in the early 1950s, and it begins at Chavez Ravine. What occurred then, the city of Los Angeles wanted to use the land, 300 acres at Chavez Ravine, to build affordable housing. The greater good. So the three Mexican-American neighborhoods that inhabited Chavez Ravine, those residents were being pushed out. Some of them took a buyout through eminent domain, usually 50 cents, 60 cents on the dollar. And others were like, hey, we've been here for 3 generations, we're not leaving. Or we're not going to leave until we get what we deserve, what our homes are worth. But similar to today, Mexican Americans felt very marginalized, and some of them refused to leave until deputies came in and literally dragged the last residents of Chavez Ravine literally from their homes, women included. And these poor people watched as their homes, some of them, again, 3 generations, bulldozed to the ground right before their very eyes. So as you can imagine, and as many, I think, in this audience probably know, up until 1981, Dodger Stadium was a very white crowd. You only had, I've interviewed sports writers like Lyle Spencer that had the Dodgers beat since 1971. And he would say generally, up until Fernando came along, you had about 5% Latino, Mexican Americans that would go out to Dodger games. Cesar Chavez, who I write about, a great, great man, civil rights leader, never stepped foot in Dodger Stadium. So all that changed with Fernando, and that's what, and it was so organic, the change. The Dodgers public relations machine, they weren't involved with it. When Fernando pitched that shutout on opening day, his first start ever, it was like everything changed. And for many Mexican Americans, they had their Mexican Sandy Koufax. They had their savior. They had their pitcher that, he wasn't a physical specimen. He was kind of overweight. He had kind of a strange haircut. Again and again, I was told by Mexican Americans that he was one of us. He reminded us of our older brother or our uncle. But he was capable of doing great, great things, better than anybody else in the game, particularly in the first half of the '81 season. He starts off the greatest start of a baseball career by a starting pitcher of all time. 8-0, 5 shutouts, 0.50 ERA. But, above all that, above what he did on the field, and above, maybe above turning Dodger Stadium into a fiesta whenever he pitched, with Mexican flags and flags from other Latin countries all over the stadium. Mexican American women discovering baseball for the first time, coming to the games with their beads and praying for Fernando to succeed. That famous scene of that young woman running onto the field in her homemade Valenzuela shirt and giving him a big kiss and a hug, and really epitomizing what the 55,000 fans there that night all want to do to Fernando. Give him just a massive hug and a kiss. Above all that, to me, I'm going to read you a quick excerpt, and it's from my chapter, Mr. Valenzuela Goes to Washington. Now, keep in mind, he's a big leaguer for 3 months at this point. While it can be debated that the apex of Fernandomania occurred when Valenzuela notched his 8th straight victory and was Sports Illustrated cover boy in mid-May, it would be hard to argue if some believe the peak of the phenomenon occurred on June 8th, an off day for the Dodgers, for it was on that afternoon that perhaps the most glorious chapter of Fernando's storybook season transpired. Under the heading of Only in America, the rookie pitcher from the tiny Mexican village of Echehuaquilla, with just 3 months of big league experience, was President Ronald Reagan's guest of honor at a White House state lunch honoring Mexican President Jose Lopez Portillo. The Mexican immigration issue was a major political one for Reagan early in his first term, and it was his administration's hope that the luncheon could help soothe some of the tensions and hardships endured by Mexican workers living in the United States during that period. So just to stop here for a moment, people would line up at that luncheon not to get President Reagan's autograph or George Bush's or Alexander Haig's or Mexican President Portillo's signature. They were lining up to get Fernando's signature, as was President Reagan. Everybody this is unheard of. This will never ever happen again. A pitcher with 3 months of experience being the life of the party at a White House luncheon. So I continue. A strong case can be made that Fernando's visit to the White House served as far more than the friendly meet and greet that it certainly was. It may have also been a harbinger for the Immigration and Control Act the Reagan administration would pass 5 years later. Ultimately, 2.7 million individuals were granted legal status under the law. Chicanos would later refer to it as the Fernando factor. I wanted, I get asked a lot, and Michael actually touched on this from his own experience with Fernando. You would think, for 20 years now, he has been the Spanish language analyst on Dodger broadcasts, the most public of positions. But he leaves games after the 7th inning to avoid the crowd. I interviewed, those baseball card shows where they usually have, a baseball player come along and they sign autographs, and the promoters of these events usually will give, someone like Steve Garvey or Ron Say, they might give them, $4,000 or $5,000 for the afternoon. Well, Fernando has been offered over $40,000 for 2 hours work to sign his signature and maybe take a few pictures, and he won't do it because of his shyness. So I want to read you a quick excerpt, and it's just a paragraph from my chapter, A Reluctant Hero. And when I gained access to the press room, this was part of what I observed about Fernando. The legend sits alone in the crowded Dodger Stadium press box cafeteria wearing a navy blue blazer, light blue shirt, and dark sunglasses one late August afternoon. His face is round, and his jet black hair is cropped short. He is almost ghost-like in the sense that somehow it's easy to walk right by or sit near him without noticing the all-time Dodgers great. An icon should light up every room they enter. Instead, this one tends to blend in. He sits alone, not because he's egotistical or self-centered, in fact, quite the opposite. In a city built on larger-than-life superstars, Fernando Valenzuela is an inhibited and reclusive one.
Wow.
So, one of the things, so why was he so embarrassed? Why was he so embarrassed to be out in public and to be interviewed, and why was he so shy? Because he's never really talked a lot about this, I had to dig. I had to put my reporter's hat on and do my research. And I found a piece in a magazine years and years and years ago, back in like 1982. I think it may have been Sports Illustrated. But the passage in my book about the incident that occurred, which led to him being labeled as Senior Silent, goes like this. Valenzuela, too, has never forgotten an embarrassing incident that occurred at a spring training English class in 1980. Barely 19 and less than a year out of the Mexican leagues, Valenzuela was so shy he would only smile at the instructor when she called upon him. The day's lesson was a simple drill on phrases used in ordering breakfast. When the teacher insisted that Valenzuela reply, Dodgers minor league instructor Chico Fernandez leaned over to Fernando and whispered an answer in the trusting youngster's ear. Taco, answered Valenzuela. The room, filled mostly with veterans, broke up laughing. Valenzuela left the class and never returned. So even though, through his remarkable run of victories to that point of the 81 season, other than the occasional meal with Jaime Jarrín, the hottest commodity in baseball, spent much of his free time on the road, up in his room watching cartoons. There is just no telling what extent that embarrassing episode had in the rest of his life. So just to close, before we open it up for a Q&A, I just want to emphasize a few things. Well, first of all, what's his legacy? What's his place in history? I wrote a chapter at the end of the book entitled Legacy. And I'm really proud of it now because I made two arguments. One to have his number retired, and one about Hall of Fame candidacy. Now, it's not just the fact that he made the All-Star team his first 6 straight years and won the Cy Young Award and Rookie of the Year in '81, the only player in history to ever do that. The impact that he had on millions and millions of people, on Mexican Americans, how he inspired them to not just become baseball players, but to become professionals, doctors, lawyers, teachers. If he could do it, they could do it. So advanced copies of the book were released about 3 months ago. So not surprisingly, some Dodgers executives wanted to have a look. So my publisher sent the advanced copies. 3 weeks later, they announced they were retiring his number. So I'm owning it. I'm owning it. So Fernando, you know, the media, the fans, in reality, they've been clamoring to have his number retired for decades. And up until this summer, the Dodgers had an unwritten rule that only Dodger players that played most of their careers with the team and are in the Baseball Hall of Fame can have their numbers retired. So they made an exception. So maybe this was the last straw. Who knows? But I do believe that he belongs on the Mount Rushmore of baseball individuals that influenced the sport the most, along with Babe Ruth, Jackie Robinson, and Marvin Miller, that made the greatest impact on the sport. And I would leave you with this. I really believe that Fernando is to Mexican Americans what Jackie Robinson was to African Americans. And so that's all I have.
Yeah. It's funny, what followed after I went to a World Series game, and Gabriel Iglesias, the comedian, Fluffy, was wearing a Fernando jersey. And then one year I covered a game, and George Lopez, comedian as well, had a jersey that said Lopezuela on the back before he threw out the first pitch. It was quite the thing.
They look so similar, don't they? With that
Yeah.
Lopez and
Yeah. What were your biggest challenges about writing this book, other than, you know, initially not getting contact with Fernando? Obviously, you figured a way around that, but, you know, what were the other challenges that you got?
Well, far and away, not having access to Fernando. So I had to make up for that by spending a good deal of time with those closest to him, his best friends in life and the game, and those that were impacted by him. Teresa Romero, president of the United Farmers Workers Union, Cesar Chavez's speechwriter. So the challenge was, you know, to get the full story without the help of Fernando. Now, I've been told by people that have read this book that that are familiar with Fernando being shy, that they feel it's almost a better book to do it this way, because there wouldn't have been much that, you know, that you would have gotten out of Fernando. In fact, one of the things that I noticed by observing him is there's like a lot of shoulder shrugs and a lot of very short answers. And so my challenge, the ultimate challenge, was to tell his story as fully as I could without his help. That was the big challenge.
Well, you got some interesting, I mean, so especially some of the players like Steve Garvey, my favorite, Dusty Baker, you know, all those guys, especially Dusty Baker. I have to bring him up because you wrote a book several years ago about Glenn Burke, the first, you know, known gay player to play baseball in the major leagues. and together those two invented the high five.
Yeah.
But it was just amazing how articulate and just so forthright all those players were. And if you can talk about that experience of, like Garvey's a politician.
Yes.
Yeah, he's great, but he won't say much. But when you get him talking about Fernando, which you did, it was pretty incredible.
Yeah. I mean, there was Garvey. There was Rick Monday was incredible.
Yeah.
An incredible interview. Jerry Royce. Yeah. Nobody said an unkind word about Fernando.
Wow.
It was remarkable. I mean, you talk to 100 people about anybody. They may say something. They may, this one time some kid wanted an autograph and, he kept walking, something like that. There was nothing like that with Fernando. So I think what surprised me the most, besides how shy Fernando is, turning down $40,000 to sign autographs for a couple of hours, I think it was the reaction I would get from the players. In the front office, I interviewed Fred Clare, who was terrific. He was general manager who actually released Fernando, and still had wonderful things to say. Bruce Bochy and Fernando's time up in San Diego, when Bochy was a rookie manager, it was like nobody turned me down. This is my 8th book. Every once in a while, someone's like, I don't think I've been turned down, but sometimes you just get the sense that they're not really into the interview sometimes. Not in this case. Everyone was eager to talk, and it's just great stuff. I mean, I could have written a 1,000-page book, with the quality interviews that I had. It was terrific.
Can you reveal your favorite?
My favorite interview?
Yeah.
Well, it's pretty funny, actually. The most entertaining was with Bill Lee. Does anyone know who Bill Lee is? Yeah, he was the Red Sox pitcher, and he went to the Expos. And when he was with the Expos, in my opinion, the greatest game that Fernando ever pitched was the 5th game of the 81 championship series against the Expos. 8 2/3 innings. This is a kid from Sonora, Mexico, and it is literally flurrying. My daughter's goes to school in Montreal. It's still snowing up there, right?
Not anymore.
All right. It's crazy. So it's snowing, and Fernando's so loose before the 5th game. He's out in the outfield with Rick Monday, and he's like catching snow flurries in his mouth. So Bill Lee, pitched on that Expos team, and Bill Lee is just so entertaining. He's the one, when he was asked what he thought about artificial grass, and he said, "I don't know. I've never smoked it." So I mean, he has so many great one-liners. So that was the most entertaining.
Okay.
Billy's great, and of course he's still upset with the Expos, and that was really the end when Rick Monday beat them with the home run.
Right.
That was the beginning of the end for Montreal. But I would think probably Jaime Jarrín, the Hall of Fame Spanish language
Wonderful.
broadcaster, over I think 67 years. 67 years is the Dodgers Spanish language. So he was the closest to Fernando. He was his interpreter. For 6 years, even long after Fernando understood some English. And he was really the one that brought Fernando back into the Dodgers family, because the Dodgers released Fernando. And just a 30-second story here. In the spring of '91, the Dodgers went to Mexico for a 3-game series. And Fernando was the returning conquering hero. And they sell the place out. People are literally in Mexico trying to climb into the stadium because there are no more tickets. The Dodgers team bus is being chased down the street by Fernando fans. Fernando pitches great that day. The next 3 spring training games, he doesn't have his best stuff. They release him. Now, he's not the same Fernando by this point. Even though he pitched a no-hitter the September before, that was just on pure guts and pitching savvy. Like, his best days were over. But the Dodgers cut him. And if it wasn't for Jaime Jarrín saying, look, come back, you can work in the broadcast booth with me, back in the Dodgers family where you belong. So Jaime Jarrín was terrific. And I think he was terrific because he was so close. He was as close to the father figure that Fernando was missing when he came to Los Angeles.
And his voice, I just remember in the 80s, I mean, you would hear Vin Scully on the radio, anybody who knows Dodger Stadium, but, during Fernando, you would hear Jaime's voice as well. So you'd hear this mixture of Spanish and English meshed together in a baseball game. And it was funny because if you knew a little bit of Spanish, you can tell he and Vin Scully were kind of saying the same things, the same brilliant things. It was quite amazing. Bill Lee, I have to say, was very interesting. I think he wanted to be part of the Rhinoceros Party, which abolished the IRS. He wanted to abolish the IRS.
Among other things,
Interesting stuff. Did anything surprise you while writing this book about Fernando? I mean, you probably got a good sense talking to everybody, but was there any one thing that you were like, I didn't know that, or I didn't realize this about Fernando?
Oh, the intense shyness. That just, the extent of the shyness was the thing that surprised me the most. Especially since he's a broadcaster, an analyst. That intense shyness and privacy, above and beyond anything else, that's what surprised me the most.
Which goes against him with his teammates because he was a prankster. He was a practical joker.
Yeah, he could be. He was an expert at the lasso, and he wouldn't do it to the veterans like Rick Monday and Garvey
Dusty Baker
and Don. Well, Sutton's already gone, but but the veterans. So he would get a lasso with the younger players, and he would rope them. And he was also really good at hacky sack. I mean, he could go on forever. I'll tell you another thing that surprised me. I was told again and again. He's a terrific athlete.
Yeah.
The only thing he couldn't really do was run, but then when he got to San Diego, I don't know what happened, but some of the pitchers on that team said no, he could run pretty good, so maybe he got faster. I don't know, but he could do it, and he was a terrific hitter.
Yeah.
I mean, if he played today with the DH rule, he probably would have. He hit. When he was 8-0 at that point, he was also hitting over 500.
Yeah.
I mean, he was Babe Ruth.
Yeah. I remember one game on television, Tommy wanted his bat in there, so they put him out in left field for like 2 batters, and thankfully nobody hit him the ball. But he came back in and he hit. Last question for you is Fernando aware of the book, and has he responded or said anything to you?
He hasn't. He has not, and I know his inner circle. They're very pleased with the book, so I'm sure that they've told him about it. I don't know if he's read it. I'm going to find out soon. But the book was just released on May 1st, so I'm going to give it a little bit of time. But my personal opinion, I hope that his friends will tell him, it portrays you fine, you don't have to worry about anything.
Yeah, it does.
But he may just take a copy of the book and throw it off the side. I don't know. Hopefully that's not the case. I'll be back in LA probably in August, and I'll get a chance to see him then, because I've become really friendly with his broadcasting partners, and so we'll see what happens.
Well, good luck on that.
Thanks.
Really, Questions? Go ahead, Jim.
Did you interview some of the opposing batters? Because his windup, and I'm sure you know,
Looking
his
to
eyes
heavens,
would roll back and he'd look up at God or something and I'd be going like this the whole time.
Yeah, he had that eyes to the sky delivery, And Tommy Lasorda, you know, I actually wrote an entire chapter on Tommy Lasorda because he was made to order for a shy kid like Fernando, because Tommy never saw a camera he didn't love. And so Tommy would say, well, you know, to the reporters, you know what he's looking at the great Dodger in the sky. Because Tommy was convinced that God was a Dodger fan. So,
Aren't you?
He's a New Yorker.
Yeah, so basically, Garvey, Pedro Guerrero, guys that I interviewed when they were opposing Fernando. Kevin Mitchell, who became an MVP with the Giants, and they said, yeah, he was very hard to pick up, and the screwball was great. In fact, Mookie Wilson, who I did a book with years ago, I interviewed him just to ask him just that question, like, what was it like? And he said that Fernando never lost his screwball, that he may have lost his fastball later in his, but not the screwball. It was as good when Mookie faced him in '81 as it was when he faced him again in '88 and '89.
Wow. It says something about a player who gets immortalized in the best baseball movie, All the Average, talking about Bull Durham.
Oh, yeah.
They did
Yes.
a whole thing, Susan Sarandon did a whole thing on Fernando Valenzuela, so that's saying a lot. Yeah, go ahead, Professor.
Thanks for doing the book. Did you ever think about submitting written questions to Fernando and possibly getting him to respond? And secondly, why hasn't, what is your explanation of the fact that Fernando is not in the Hall of Fame? And is there a pattern there in terms of not many Latinos players in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, so let me take the Hall of Fame question first. I think what it comes down to is his career record. His first 6 years in the game, he was on the Hall of Fame track. There's no question about it. But then, I mean, he was overused. And I realize it was the 80s, and pitchers would go on 3 days rest occasionally and 4 days rest. Some pitchers went 300 innings. But for a young kid like that, especially one that threw the screwball, which really taxes your arm, it was overwhelming. In fact, whereas Tommy Lasorda was great for a kid like that, a shy kid with the media, Tommy could have rested him more. Even in '81, I mean, this is a rookie. This is a kid that wasn't used to the wear and tear on his arm. And in '81, there was a baseball strike. And the Dodgers were in first place after the first half. So they had a spot in the playoffs. So they could basically rest their pitchers the final 2 months of the season and get ready for the postseason. But Tommy, in September, kept throwing Fernando out there every 3 days. Now, part of it was because they sold out. So it was good for business. But, you know, it was terrible for Fernando. And he pitched a crazy amount of innings, especially for a screwball pitcher, and that messed up his arm, and he was never really the same. So he did pitch a no-hitter in 1990. He did resurrect his career 5 years after that with the Padres, you know, helped them make the playoffs in '96. Then he retired the year after that. So you look at his body of work, I mean, I think the best argument, and I make it in the book, is that Sandy Koufax had 6 great years. Fernando had 6 great years, and Sandy Koufax was a first ballot Hall of Famer. Now, before everybody jumps on me about Sandy, I will say this: Sandy had a 4-year string that I think statistically, I'm sure of it, was the greatest 4-year run in the history of baseball.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a little bit of a difference there. But I believe that at a minimum, Fernando should have gotten far more consideration for the Hall of Fame than he did. I think he topped out at 42%. You need 75%. What was the first part of your question?
Whether you had ever thought about submitting written
Oh, yeah.
questions.
So absolutely, I went through his people, and they just kept telling me Fernando's not ready to talk. He's not ready to work, to assist on a book. He's not ready. He's not ready. So Dodgers public relations, they have their own speak, and that meant no, he's never going to talk to you, which is fine. That's his right. That's his right. He's turned down movie deals. I mean, 7-figure movie deals. He's turned down autobiographies, which high 6 figures, and he just won't do it.
Interesting.
So-
Along the lines of pitching, keep in mind that Fernando is throwing 150 pitches a game,
Yeah.
and nowadays kids only throw about 100, and then they get pulled before they get to the third part of the lineup. So he threw about 50% more than a young kid would pitch, and hence Tommy did overuse him, but that's the way it was. So.
I get the shy part, but did you get a sense from your interviews about the confidence level of the guy? Was he a confident person, or did he kind of swim in insecurities, or?
Extremely confident.
Yeah.
One of the most confident pitchers of all time.
Yeah.
Opening day, Fred Clare, and it's in the book, he tells a story how he's standing next to Fernando in the dugout before, they're lining up on the field. Now, a veteran would be feeling some nausea. First of all, Fred Clare told me that Fernando took a 20-minute nap in the trainer's room beforehand, and he's in the dugout, and he almost looked bored. He's just like wondering, okay. Is shy, he could be so shy with people, but on that mound, he was the most confident guy in the world.
Wow.
After he pitched that no-hitter, if you watch a YouTube of the video of the last out, I think he goes from the mound to the dugout in 27 seconds. After pitching a no-hitter, today, I mean, they're out there with their teammates celebrating with water and all that for minutes. 27 seconds, I think it was. But no, he was extremely confident on the mound, and I think it stems from his impoverished upbringing. No electricity. He played on ball fields without backstops, without stands. I mean, he was so poor, and he was one of, I think, 13 children. So he didn't have anything. And I think he probably looked at baseball like, this is easy compared to the way I grew up. And it just gave him that confidence.
Thank you.
All right. Any more questions before? Yes.
Was that Fernando's dream to be a pro pitcher? I mean, was that really what he wanted out of life?
Yeah, absolutely. He actually dropped out of school after the 8th grade, and he started playing on Mexican teams. And so he would have been 14 years old when he was actually playing with grown men in the Mexican leagues, which is part of the reason he was able to get signed at 19 with, to the big league club at 19, because he had already pitched with professional men for almost 6 years, five years, yeah. So, no, that's what he wanted to do. It was either going to be that or he's going to be a farmer. It was one of the two.
Thank you.
Do you have any closing comments?
No, I think we've covered quite a bit. I know you've been standing for a while. And, oh, we have one more question.
Yeah.
What was the score on his opening day when he pitched?
2-0.
I thought it was 1 or 2. I couldn't sure remember that.
2-0, yeah.
Yeah, that was great.
Well, Erik Sherman, thank you for coming, and thank you everyone else.
Thank you.
All right, let's sign some books.
You want to get your book signed, Daddy?
Yeah.
Have him sign it.
Okay.